Howdy folks, welcome back to Doing Brew. On today's episode we're going to be covering trim painting techniques. Everything you need to know to get that beautiful professional finish. Starting off with spackling, how to apply, sand, and reapply if necessary. And then using a good premium wall and wood primer made by Sherwin-Williams. 2 coats of that, we'll sand in between. Then the proper use of paintable silicone caulk. It's probably overused by a lot of folks, myself included, before I discovered some better techniques. And then we'll go over using a beautiful paint, Benjamin Moore's Satin in Pervo. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the first thing we have to do is go back and ensure that all of our nail heads are properly set. Use a nail set available at the home store at your hardware section. And go ahead and make sure that all of those are set at least 1/8 of an inch below the surface. You want to make sure that this spackling has something to get into and anchor itself to so it doesn't fall out over time. Okay, and then we're going to use our dry neck spackling, and we're going to make sure that we really work the spackling into the holes. Please don't just do a once over and think you're done. You've really got to work it in. And as you can see, I like using the spackling that goes on pink and dries white. I usually let it all set up overnight, but this way, just at a glance, I can ensure that it's properly cured before I start sanding. Okay. Now for those nail holes, you want to apply and reapply, and as I said, work it in to ensure you've got a good grab. And then when you're just about done, you want to do a little bit of a skim coat and make sure that you've got just a little more than you need. Okay, that's for the nail holes. For any gaps that you might have, again, use spackling. Please don't go through and glob on a bunch of caulking, because that once it's on, you're stuck with the way it looks. With the spackling, you work it into that seam, that gap, and you overfill, you work it in, you overfill, you work it in, and then you can go back and sand and reapply if you have to. It's all about getting one uniform piece of furniture when you're done, and that's exactly what good trim work is. It's not just a molding around the doorway, it's furniture. Okay, working that in, and you can see that's just perfect. It's overfilled just enough, nice and smooth, and that'll sand up beautifully. So you can see kind of what the finished product looks like. There's an awful lot of spackling on this door surround that I created, a craftsman-style door surround, but the majority of this is going to sand away. Probably about 90% of what you see here will be gone when we're complete with our sanding. Which comes up next. The sanding on a project like this, this door surround, probably take about half hour, 40 minutes to do a good job. But you do want to do as good a job as you possibly can. You want all of those fills to be very nice and smooth. Once you start priming and painting, any defects on the surface are really going to jump out at you. You can see I'm using that sanding sponge or a flexible piece of 3M sandpaper. Both are very good at getting into the different profiles of your trim work and getting you the finish you're looking for. Now here you can see after sanding, by golly, there was a crown staple that just wasn't set deep enough. No big deal. Let's go ahead and reset that. And then we'll refill it with some spackling. And we'll give it overnight again to set up. If you're a homeowner doing these projects, you most likely have quite a bit of time. And then we'll go back and resand. And at this time, I'm making sure that all of my gaps and seams are absolutely invisible. Okay, once I'm done with all the spackling and sanding, we'll give the entire piece good going over with the shop vac. Make sure we get all of the the dust off. Now it's time to break open our Sherwin-Williams Premium Wall and Wood Primer. I've used a ton of different primers in the past, folks. This stuff, in my opinion, is the best. It goes on nice and smoothly. It fills in the pores, but most importantly, it sands really, really well. You want to use a good quality paintbrush, and in my book, that's a Purdy paintbrush, P-U-R-D-Y. I've had some of my paintbrushes for 15, maybe even 20 years, the same paintbrush. As long as you wash them up nicely, they stay just as good as the day you bought them. Okay, now putting on the primer, I like to work in small sections, make sure I get a real nice clean coverage, nice and smooth. Put it on not too heavy, and then finish out with broad strokes back and forth. When I do my painting, I like to start in the bottom right and work my way up and around the interior of the jamb and header, and then I'll go to the left side of the casing and work my way up the casing and then across the frieze from left to right, and then we'll finish out the cornice from right to left. This primer goes on very nicely, very smoothly, and as I said, when you're done and it's fully cured, it sands real nicely. Okay, so as you dab with your brush to get into the nooks and crannies of whatever molding detail you have, you want to finish up with nice, long, broad strokes. And the way I paint from left to right, top to bottom, going back and forth, that really ensures that I'm always working with a nice wet edge. Don't ever want to have an area that's just tacky, and then you're going to apply new paint, because that's when it gets a little bit gummy. Alright, next I like to use these flexible 3M sandpaper sheets. As I said, nice and flexible. You can use them with a whole variety of different materials and then just rinse them out in the sink, and they're almost as good as new. Plus, they wrap around a sanding sponge to give it a little bit more, structure, if you will. So just like with the spackling, I'm going to give the entire piece a real good once-over with the sanding sheet and sponge. This won't take quite as long as when I was sanding the spackling, but you do want to take your time. Make sure you hit all the high spots. Any areas where you can still see a little bit of spackling through, make sure that you hit those real well. And you can see how the primer sands up. Real nice, fine, kind of talcum powder consistency. Now, if you sand a little aggressively and a little bit of wood shows through, that's okay. This is the first coat of primer. Really, at this point, you're just looking to tie the entire piece together and fill those wood pores. Now, we'll give it another once over with the shop vac. Make sure we get all the dust up. And you can see here there's a little bit of a gap there. You see that? That's too big, in my opinion, to fill with caulking. So I'm going to go back with a little bit of spackling, and we're going to fill that guy. And so you'll note, obviously, that I'm filling it after the first coat of primer. That's okay. The spackling adheres just as well over the Sherwin-Williams primer as it does on raw wood. And now I'm looking for, you see that? It might be kind of hard to see. There's a little tiny divot there. When you're done with your piece, when you have all your final coats of paint on, you don't want to see any nail marks. So I try and fill every single one, no matter how small. Then we'll let this set up again, and we'll go back and sand it. Okay, this is where the two boards that make up the frieze on this door surround come together. I wasn't absolutely happy with how invisible, or not so invisible, it was after the first coat of primer, so I went ahead and applied a little bit more spackling. Get it nice and smooth. Feather those edges real well, and that will blend in, and I don't think you'll even be able to see that even after the next coat of primer, not to mention the 2 coats of finish paint. Okay, so now I've got the second coat of primer on. I didn't want to bore you with watching me paint again. Now I'm going to go fill any cracks, seams, joints, what have you, with caulking. Now this is one time where you absolutely have to use caulking and not spackling, is anywhere where your trim piece meets something other than another piece of wood or painted drywall. So here, this is where it matches up with my countertop. I like using that blue tape. I put it down to the provide the reveal that I want with the caulking. Put the caulking on, I let it set up for about 10 minutes, and then very carefully peel that away. And boy, it really is a beautifully sharp caulk line there. Okay. Now, if you use this this taping technique, do not let your paint dry, until it's fully cured, because then when you go to pull it off, that silicone will just pull away from your woodwork. Okay, so nice tight line there, and that'll paint up real nicely. Okay, next is to mask off all around the patio door with the painter's tape. And this is not prior to painting, it's prior to applying a bead of caulk around where the molding, that casing and header, meet the door frame itself. So just as before with the countertop, a bead of caulking, and then using the most valuable tool in my toolbox, a finger, to get a nice tight line. Now, you want to be able to see the blue tape through your caulking. If you cannot see any blue tape, your caulking is too thick, and what that will leave is like a heavy ridge line where your caulking meets the doorway, the door frame. You don't want that. Okay, now that our caulking is complete and our 2 coats of primer and all of our spackling and sanding is complete, it's time to move on to the finish coat. We're going to use the Satin and Pervo by Benjamin Moore, but we're going to use the Flood Floetrol as well. It's an additive that prevents the paint from drying too quickly and ensures that whether you're painting or brushing, it eliminates, it significantly reduces the amount of brush or roller marks in your paint. Keeps it from drying too fast. So, mix that up per the directions on the bottle. Make sure we stir that up very, very well. You want to make sure you take the time to stir it up. You don't want any pools of the Floetrol in that will run over your woodwork. So take your time, stir that up nicely. And then I really like to pour the paint into a disposable cup that I can get at my paint store. It keeps the paint fresh, keeps the paint in the gallon jug from drying too fast. It's just a better way to work. Okay, now with the painting, you'll see that I dab it, kind of push it down to the lower edge where I need it to go, and then finish off with a long stroke. So you want to work the paint into the nooks and crannies of your woodwork, and then finish off with a nice long stroke. Minimize those brush marks. Now using the Floetrol really gives me a lot of flexibility. As you can see there, I was painting the casing and the jamb at the same time. The paint doesn't set up nearly as fast as without it, so it gives me a little more flexibility. Now here I'm painting where the jamb meets the door frame itself. I didn't tape off, I'm just freehanding that line. Easy to do, and I'll show you how to do that when I paint the top of the cornice. It'll a little more contrast there with the tan paint. Okay, now here just making sure I get the end of the frieze painted up nicely, finishing off those long strokes, and you can really see the real nice luster that this satin and pervo paint has, and it maintains that nice luster. It's kind of a pearlescent color when it's dried. Really a lot of fun to do the painting after you've put all this time into building a project, because it really does pull the whole piece together, really makes it one piece of furniture as opposed to a handful of different pieces of wood nailed and glued together. Okay, and this is what it looks like after 2 coats of finish paint. So that's 4 coats of paint total, but you can see the finish is just smooth and beautiful. I would almost dare you guys to try and find a nail hole or an open crack or seam. Okay, so now it comes time to finish off the entire project and cut in all of our over brushing with a matching wall paint. So as you can see, I maintain a rather wet edge and pull that paint down to where I need it. I'm not taping off, and in my opinion, by taping off and then ripping that tape off, you end up with a sloppier looking edge than just freehanding it. And I don't have the steadiest hand in the world, folks. It just a little bit of time and patience, using the right technique, maintaining a nice wet edge. You're kind of pushing the paint down more than you are brushing it onto the wall where you need it to be. You're pushing it down to fill that that intersection between the woodwork and the wall itself. But as you can see, real easy to get some professional results.